I had been doing this job for 11 years, and in that time I had learned one thing above all others. People talk when they think nobody is listening. The Vethna were not people, strictly speaking. They were geometric, faceted, crystalline, roughly 2 meters tall, and built like a slow-motion chandelier had decided to develop opinions about trade tariffs. They communicated in harmonic layering, multiple tones at once, which their own linguists called Vethna primary, and which most human scholars described accurately as extraordinarily difficult. The coalition had exactly 9 certified interpreters. I was the second most junior. My job that morning was to sit in the corner of Arbitration Suite 4 on Concord Station, take notes and not speak unless spoken to. Standard protocol. The lead negotiator was a man named Okafor, brilliant, patient, slightly too fond of sports metaphors, and he had his own interpreter standing beside him, a woman named Iseult, who had been doing this for 23 years, and had the expression of someone who had heard everything twice. I had arrived early, as I always did. Early enough to run the room's systems check, log the session into the Coalition's standard broadcast registry, and open the Homeworld channel, a legal requirement for any arbitration session involving a Vethna delegation, per the Concord Accords, Article 14, Subsection 3. The channel fed directly to the Vethna deliberative archive on their home frequency. They had asked for it themselves, 8 years ago, after a session went disputed. Everything on record, everything certified. I opened the channel, I logged the timestamp, took my seat in the corner with my notepad and my coffee, and I waited. The Vethna arrived 7 minutes later. There were 4 of them, a senior facet, 2 junior facets, and an aide whose crystalline structure was still visibly young, not yet fully set, which in Vethna terms meant something like a graduate student with strong opinions. They arranged themselves across the table from Okafor and Iseult, and the senior facet produced a data slate and began reviewing it in silence. Then the aide said something to the junior facet on its left. I did not react. I wrote it down. The aide had said, in Vethna primary, that the human lead negotiator's opening posture suggested he was prepared to offer more than he intended to concede, and that they should simply wait him out. Standard enough. Then it added that it had reviewed the session recordings from the last 3 arbitrations and had found the human language, the actual spoken language, the English, to be, and I am translating here as precisely as I can, a sequence of compressed stochastic noise emissions with occasional internal rhyme schemes that appear to carry emotional, rather than informational, content. The junior facet produced a sound that was, in Vethna terms, laughter. I wrote that down too. Okafor opened proceedings. He was good, structured, methodical, respectful of the Vethna preference for long silences between statements. He let things breathe. He made an analogy about a long-haul cargo negotiation that used the phrase, "We're not looking to leave anything on the table," and Iseult translated it, and then the aide, not realizing, or simply not caring, said in Vethna primary that it was remarkable that the human had just announced he intended to leave material on a flat surface, and that perhaps this was why human trade outcomes were so statistically poor. The senior facet made a sound that was the Vethna equivalent of a suppressed smile. I sipped my coffee, I wrote it down, I turned to a fresh page. This went on for about 40 minutes. Okafor and Iseult negotiated in good faith. The Vethna negotiated in good faith too, insofar as the table itself was concerned. Their actual offers were fair, their counterproposals reasonable, but the running commentary in Vethna primary did not stop. The junior facets had discovered that dissecting English idioms was, apparently, a pleasant way to pass the time between formal exchange. They catalogued the phrase "let's circle back" as evidence that humans experience time as a surface. They found touch base to be evidence of a tactile fixation in human cognition. When Okafor said the proposed shipping adjustment was not a hill worth dying on, one of them went very still for a moment, as if genuinely uncertain whether he was describing a military casualty calculation or a real estate assessment. At one point, the aide attempted to explain to the junior facet beside it why humans use the phrase "in the ballpark" when discussing numerical ranges. It spent nearly 4 minutes on this. It concluded solemnly that humans had developed their numerical approximation concepts around recreational enclosures, which it seemed to find deeply informative about something. The junior facet agreed. They harmonized briefly on the point. A little two-toned chord of mutual satisfaction, and then returned to watching Okafor with the polite, patient attention of beings who believed they had already won. I filled a page and a half of notes. 2 pages by the time the session broke. Some of it was session content. Some of it was the commentary, logged verbatim, in my own shorthand. Old habit. You document what's in the room, all of it, because you never know what becomes relevant later. I had stopped trying to suppress my expression about 20 minutes in. I was not smiling, I was just bored. The specific boredom of someone who has heard a joke many times and is waiting patiently for the telling of it. End. I had been the only human in rooms full of Vethna before. It was a common enough assumption that the quiet one in the corner with the notepad was furniture of a particularly organized kind. It was an assumption I had stopped correcting years ago. Correcting it too early ruins the data. The session broke for a recess at the 90-minute mark. Okafor stretched, said something to Iseult about getting tea, and they stepped out. The Vethna aide, emboldened by the recess, asked the senior facet in Vethna primary whether it believed humans were aware that their language had essentially no tonal precision, and whether this lack of tonal precision might explain what it called the chaotic variance in their diplomatic outcomes. The senior facet considered this for a moment. Then it noticed that I had not left the room. I still inset corner, still had my notepad, still had my coffee, which had gone cold. But I was not a person who wasted coffee just because it had stopped being warm. The senior facet looked at me with the particular arrangement of its internal facets that, in Vethna body language, indicated polite uncertainty about the status of a thing in a room. I said, in Vethna primary, certified second-tier accent, which meant my harmonics were not quite native, but were precise. That I hoped the recess had been restful, and that I wanted to remind the delegation that per Article 14, subsection 3 of the Concord Accords, broadcast channel had been opened and logged at the session's start, as required, and had been active for the past 93 minutes. The aide's crystalline structure made a sound I had never heard before. I wrote it down later as best I could. It was somewhere between a very fast contraction and the noise a chandelier makes when someone walks into it. See, I added that I had filed the session transcript with the deliberative archive approximately 4 minutes ago, per standard end-of-segment protocol, and that it was timestamped, certified, and already indexed under this session's docket number. The senior facet did not move for a very long time, closed my notepad, capped my pen, and drank what was left of my cold coffee. When Okafor came back with his tea, the Vethna accepted the coalition's proposed shipping adjustment without amendment. They also accepted the secondary tariff schedule. They proposed, voluntarily, a joint review of the language access provisions in the Concord Accords. A proposal that had been sitting on the coalition's agenda, filed for 6 years. Okafor looked at Iseult. Iseult looked at him. Neither of them looked at me. On the way out, the aide stopped near my corner. It was, I think, attempting to compose something to say. Its facets made small, incomplete harmonic shapes. The Vethna equivalent of a sentence started and abandoned several times. I let it work through this for a moment. Then I said, in Vethna primary, that I had always found English idioms precise when you understood what they were actually measuring. Leaving things on the table, for instance, is not about furniture. It is about what you chose not to take when you could have. The aide stood there. I picked up my notepad, tucked it under my arm, and walked out. The session report noted the outcome as favorable. The tariff schedule was approved. The language access review was scheduled. The Homeworld channel transcript, all 93 minutes of it, was certified and archived as required. Nobody filed a formal objection. I assumed they had done the math.